Well, finally. Facebook can be such a pain. I'm only 10 minutes late. What the hell? Anyway, good afternoon. This is the next talk that I'm going to do, and I want to do this one with a sense of urgency because of Beltane next week. I first did this talk, or a variant of it, in 1997 at the NEC Birmingham. Excuse me. And it was in front of 3,000 fellow archaeologists. And it was in relation to alignments that you find in stone circles, stone rows, passage tombs, and such like, as to why no one could seem to find them. And we talked about the calendar. Now, when you throw the idea of the calendar out at people, you normally get this kind of idea that 12 months, varying between 31 days, 28 or 29 in February. And this is pretty much what has been imposed over the entire world. It's got a name. It's actually called the Gregorian calendar, and it is done so for a reason, which I'll go into later. But most people know it just as the calendar, unless you live in countries where you use an alternative. Then it's known as the Gregorian. It's also given an official status as ISO 8601 2004, 2004 being the last time the formula to maintain its accuracy was updated. Now, like I explained, the calendar is a very subjective thing, and it's not original. In actual fact, the one that we use is actually quite late in its construction. But humans are a very, very curious bunch. We always have been, and I think we probably always will be. What you see in front of you right now is a series of cave paintings on a variety of aurochs, which is the predecessor to our modern cows. This is the primary food source for humans. Well, not only humans, but also Neanderthals. Because A and C is Neanderthal cave painting, and B and D is human. There are marks, which have been highlighted by the yellow circle. Those are lunar references. These people, both Neanderthal and human, are keeping tabs of the 30-day lunar cycle to monitor the migration routes of these animals. Albeit at this time, these are not domesticated animals, these are wild animals moving in herds. And this reference comes up again and again and again, that literally you had an opportunity for 4 months and then you had to move on. You had to follow them. So it's literally like a kind of seasonal event that both Neanderthals and humans followed their around. This is a sort of very, very early, crude calendar, but effective, because they obviously must have succeeded, because we're here, their descendants. As I previously expressed, humans being very curious, what they wanted to know is how their world worked. Why did things do the way they did? So, and this is where I specialize as an archaeologist, it's the transition period between the hunter-gatherer in the Mesolithic and the settled farmer in the Neolithic. What has caused them to change their path? Why? What science did they use at the time to allow that adjustment in their lifestyle so that they could survive? And one of the major aspects of that is understanding your environment, understanding the seasons. And they did that by a variety of ways. Here in the UK, the most common ideas is standing stones, stone circles, passage tombs, monoliths, stone rows, this sort of thing, where the sun would appear at a specific place at a specific time to be able to give you the idea of what is coming next. Getting away from Europe and going into the Near East, they did things slightly differently. They looked to the sky. They saw patterns in the sky where the sun would rise. The pattern of stars above it would give them an idea of what part of the season or what part of the cycle they were at. That's the one that most of us know, because it led to a higher understanding of the cyclical nature of the world and the seasons, how it migrated, till eventually you ended up with what we now accept as the zodiac. All this understanding is about survival, about understanding which part of the year that you're in, to when to plant, when the young are going to be born, when you can reap, when the harvest was coming, when the worst part, the winter, was coming. Because at this point in time, they could clearly see that there were 4 seasons. There was a warmer, there was a hot, a cooler, and a cold. And the world moved in those cycles. So now we have the zodiac, and it's always been 12, because the lunar cycle is 30 days. It's not a case of academic mathematics. They were going to operate solely on what they see. Now there's always an element of confusion about, is the solar lunar cycles, well particularly in the lunar, is it 28 days or is it 30 days? Well, both are correct. Depends on how you measure it. The 28-day cycle is what's known as sidereal time, and it measures the moon's position in the sky from fixed point to fixed point. So it does exactly 360-degree movement around the Earth, and it takes around about just slightly under 28 days to do that. However, that's not what you see. When you look at the moon phase to phase, either new moon to new moon or full moon to full moon, you do your 28 days, and then you've got to wait 2 more days before the moon actually hits the same phase as what you started. It's like planet Earth's rotation. Is it 24 hours or is it 23 hours 56 minutes? Well, again, both are right. If you go from fixed point to fixed point, the Earth takes 23 hours 56 minutes to do exactly 360 degrees. However, if you match from dawn this morning exactly 23 hours 56 minutes, tomorrow morning it will not be dawn. The one thing that sidereal time doesn't take into account is that the Earth is moving, so your point of view is changing. So the Earth takes 24 hours to go from dawn to dawn. Well, at least it does on the equator. There are varying times in the northern and southern hemisphere because of our tilt, but on the equator it takes 24 hours to do dawn to dawn. Conversely, the moon takes 30 days to go from new moon to new moon, or full moon to full moon, and that's how they set the months. And there are 4 fixed points that we have no say over. That's 2 solstices and 2 equinoxes. That's 4. 12 can be divided amongst those 4 events, giving you the 12-month year. Obviously, I'm speeding through thousands of years of changes and calculations and whatnot to be able to get to a point like this, because at first they thought there was just 360 days, so the calendar would go out of whack every year. They would have to put in an intercalary month or a leap month or a leap week just to get the calendar back. But eventually they've got their mathematics together and they were able to produce 365 and a quarter days. You've got to adjust it every 4 years, and then you've got to adjust it every 400 years backwards. That gets complicated, but eventually they do it and they get it right. Now, here in the West, we did things slightly differently. But the interesting thing is that the 2 systems, although thousands of miles apart and thousands of years apart, coincide so exactly that it takes your breath away. But it stands to reason that it has to be exact, because it's the same Earth, the same movement, the same sun. And the way we did it here was that we started at a fixed point, and that invariably became the spring equinox. They would mark that by placing a stone. Now, what was so important about the spring equinox? It's important because it's the start of the new year. It's the start of the new cycle. It's the start of the new agricultural year. It's the start of the new growth. That's why it became so important. But as these people observed, they would have seen the sun move along the horizon. Now we're at the summer solstice. This is the start of summer. I know it gets confusing. Some people think it's midsummer. It's not. It's start of summer. I'll explain to you the confusion in a moment. But as time moved on, they saw that it returned to the equinox point. The stone they put in, it will reappear there. That's the autumn equinox. And equally, as time went on, they saw that it moved along the horizon to the furthest most point, which was the winter solstice. And then it came back again. Now in the sky, we can actually, when you do a fixed camera, it produces something in the sky called an analemma. The crossover point in the center is the spring autumn equinox. The highest most point on the left is the summer solstice, and the lowest most point on the right is the winter solstice. And it produces this figure 8 shape in the sky. That's not the only one it does. It does another one on the horizon, but more complicated. If we go back to our spring equinox, the sun is at 87 degrees azimuth. For the ancient Near East, it's at 0 degree Aries. 89 degrees azimuth. The azimuth is a calculation of degrees. It's a modern one of where an object is on the horizon using true north as point 0. So 89 degrees around, the sun is there on the spring equinox, the start of the agricultural, horticultural, ethereal new year. As time went by, they got to recognize that there were key points, there were crossover points that happened only on one day a year. The first one is at 63 degrees azimuth, Beltane, mid-spring. Carry on, and we hit the summer solstice. This is 50 degrees azimuth. The sun will not go any further north from this point. The sun is at 0 degrees Cancer. As the sun goes back, it hits the same stone. Now you think, well, it can do that at any time. There are only key moments, and this shows up on the passage tombs. It doesn't do a day earlier, it doesn't do a day later. It does it on the day, and you can't say, well, it'll happen tomorrow, and this time on the next season it'll happen again on that particular time. No, it won't, because they pass each other. And this is the point that the two cross between Beltane and Lughnasadh. And the passage tombs show this. The sun only appears at that time when the sun is at 63 degrees azimuth. Beltane, the sun is at 63 degrees azimuth. They didn't have these measurements, they just had line of sight. And it appears either side of the solstice, you've got Beltane, solstice, Lughnasadh. The sun hits those points specifically on those given dates. Go back to the autumn equinox, that's a crossover point. And then we start to go south as we're going towards the darker months. The first one to come across is what we refer to as Samhain. The sun is at 115 degrees azimuth. As time carries on, we get back into the winter solstice. That's at 127 degrees azimuth. The sun does not go any further south from this point. And then we got Imbolc. The sun again is at 115 degrees azimuth. And then we return to the spring equinox. Now, does that make sense? It's a bit complicated because we're used to sort of working with numbers, but the ancients here, particularly across Europe, into the UK and Ireland, they use stones with considerable accuracy. So much accuracy that they continue to survive because we're still here. And we see evidence of that again and again and again. And across, there's over 4,771 standing stone circles and megaliths across Europe and Ireland. There are 337 passage tombs, all of which align. The best ones, if you want to say, is in County Meath in the Republic of Ireland. Those are amazing because they've not been messed around with, so they're those alignments. It's also where my mother-in-law lives, so she was a good folk teller. Now we go back into the ancient Near East, and they're working off a zodiac. Now they did some pretty amazing stuff from this, but they had a slightly different counting system. What they would do is they would count on the phalanges of their finger. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That would be indicated as the thumb of the other hand. You can see the picture in front of you. They would do it again, 1, 2, 3, 4 up to 12. That would be the thumb and the index finger. That's 24. You see it goes on, and the next one is 36, 48, 60. This is where we get 60 from. Now the ancient Sumerians really went to town with this. They got it really right, because we still use that system to this current day. There's 60 seconds to a minute, 60 minutes to an hour, 12 hours to a day, 12 hours to a night. There's 60 seconds to a minute, there's 60 minutes to a degree, and ultimately 360 degrees to a full circle. This is the beginning of mathematics. So all those that didn't like mathematics at school, you've got the Sumerians, the Mesopotamians, and the Babylonians to blame for this. But each one developed this system, advanced it to a point where they now have pure geometry and trigonometry. They can work out area, they can work out the yield of that area, all from watching the sun rise into a star sign. So our clocks, our compass, is all based on this ancient system. 30 days to a month, 12 months to a cycle or a year. At that time they didn't know that planet Earth has a slightly ecliptic orbit, so it takes us an extra 5 days to go around, or 5 1/4. They eventually, as I said, they eventually worked it all out, so we've got our current year, but it's still 12 months to a year. Some months now have 31 days. February has only 28 because that's when we actually hit our perigee in our orbit, so we speed up. And then when we reach our apogee, which is the other end, furthest away from the sun, we slow down. So that's why some months have got extra 31 days in the middle, and February has only 28, taking into account the changes in our velocity. That was primarily down to the Greeks. They were clever like that. And talking about Greeks, they have their own calendar. It works on the same system of where the sun rises, and they fix their calendar each year on the spring. No, they don't. They fix it on the summer solstice. That's the start of the Attic or Hellenic New Year. They fix the calendar to that, and then they let it migrate on. And what you see out in front of you is actually this year's calendar for March. I was originally going to do this talk in March, so I got everything set up. So we're in the first year of the 701st Olympiad. That's the way they work it. And they work purely, it is a lunar solar calendar. Each month is 30 days, and they throw an extra intercalendary month in. That calendar is still in use in Greece. The Hellenics that are still there, they never disappeared. Particularly the Athenians still use that calendar, so it's still in use. Now, the next calendar is an unusual one because it's the Julian calendar. Every area, every land, every country, every tribal group had their own way of measuring time. But the Roman Empire is expanding itself, and it needs to coordinate so that everybody is, particularly if there's a battle to be fought, they'll say, well, we want you to be there on the 14th of March, March being the month of Mars, the god of war. Yeah, if you've got different people doing different calendars, when's the 14th of March supposed to be? You can end up with some troops arriving a week later because their calendar is slightly out of sync. So along came Julius Caesar, who realized that to be able the empire to work properly, it has to have a coordinated time. Thus came into being the Julian calendar. He based it on the original Roman calendar, which was based on the solar calendar, and it was still a solar calendar. It still had its first day of the first month of the new year on the spring equinox, which would be the 1st of March. That is the first month of the Roman and the Julian calendar. It's also, we use the same months in the Gregorian. Now we've known this for a long time, because if you think September is the 7th month, October is the 8th, November is the 9th, December is the 10th month, thereby making January the 11th and February the 12th month. It's simple really, isn't it? Now, I think most of you actually understand or know about the story of the Roman Empire. It didn't come to an abrupt end. It just sort of started to peter out. Bad emperors made bad decisions, and those decisions came home to roost. And most of the troops which were in the outer parts of the empire were withdrawn to protect Rome. It didn't happen. Rome still got sacked, but it meant that each area ended up looking after themselves. For us here in the British Isles and in Europe, we didn't do so well. We hung on for a little while, but eventually the Saxons did arrive. Some assimilated themselves in the community, but the majority have ended up pushing the Britons, who were Romanized, out to the outer extremes, which is why you see the Britons or the Celts now in Cornwall, Wales, Scotland, and in Ireland. It wasn't the Romans that pushed them back, it was the Saxons, or the Angles. It always tickles me to think that one of the greatest stories that the English love is King Arthur. And bizarrely, their love of it, they don't realize that the story is about a Roman who remained in Britain and armed the Britons against the Angles, who are now known as the English, to keep them out, and lost. That always tickles me. That's why it's a favourite story of the English. Anyhow, the Julian calendar had to be, like all calendars, has to be corrected every year. And with the fall of the Roman Empire, or the collapse of it, and ultimately the end of the Roman Republic, down into city-states, the calendar no longer got corrected, and it started to drift by one day every 116 years. So now you've got a separation between the calendar and the solar year. Every 116 years is one day further out. By the time you get to the 10th, 11th century, it's 5 days out. Go on another 500 years, it's now 10 days out. It's a week out. And will continue to do so. I talked about Rome, or the Republic of Rome, reducing down to city-states. Eventually, all these city-states began to unify and become what's now known as Italy, except for one. There was only one city-state that refused to unify and is still an independent city-state, and that is the Vatican City. Because now, at this point, you have Christianity. as the mainstay religion across the entire Western world, not the East. I'll come to that in a second. By the time the 17th century comes along, the calendar is now, like I said, 10 days out. It's drifted that much. And it's quite clear to the papacy that we need to fix this error, because of things like Passover and Christmas and Michaelmas and the Saints' Days are starting to appear at different points, and people are getting confused. Along came this fella. This is Pope Gregory. We have a calendar named after him. He decided to get his minions, his intelligent people, to rework the calendar, to reset it, to deal with an error. He also had another problem. There was the rise of a variation in Christianity in the UK here, or particularly in England, was the Anglicans, or Church of England. In the Germanic states you had Lutheranism. In France and Scotland you had another form that was Protestant to the Catholic Mass. This idea that the body and blood of Christ can be reconstituted. That was the number one problem. And they were Protestant against it, and that's where the term Protestant comes from. They were protesting. Now, the Catholic Church, in its tolerance, decided that this was heresy and that they should all be burnt. So there was a clampdown. The trouble is, there was, how do you get to find out who's who? Well, one of the ways of doing it is to alter the calendar. Now, instead of reverting the calendar back 10 days so that it follows the solar calendar, that is unacceptable, because that means that the heathens have the days, and that is unacceptable completely. So instead of resetting the calendar back, they pushed it forward another 10 days, thereby making the calendar fixed. And this is how they did it. In 1582, you went to bed on Thursday, the 4th of October, and you woke up on Friday, the 15th. They whacked 10 days out, and suddenly you were in the future. And now it's the Gregorian calendar. So now the Gregorian calendar is a clear 20 days out from the solar. But that's not what they're interested in. They're interested in fixing their festivals. They're not interested in the pagans anymore. Anybody that's accused of paganism, particularly here in the UK, you're just hung for witchcraft and whatnot. That's another story that went out of hand. Not all countries adopted the Gregorian calendar. Only the Western Christian, the Eastern Orthodox, never adopted it. And to this day, they still don't. They still use the Julian calendar. That's Russia, Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, Ukraine, parts of Greece, Turkey, because they use the Julian as well as the Islamic calendar. And believe it or not, the Isle of Fola off of the north of Scotland still uses the Julian calendar. We still use the Julian calendar until 1752. By this time, another 2 centuries has gone on. It's now 12 days out of sync from the solar. So we had to adjust ourselves by 12 days. So we went from the 2nd of September to the 14th of September to be able to align ourselves with Europe. Now, the other countries that still use their own calendars still do use the Gregorian purely for coordination, for business purposes, for trading, for travel, and this sort of thing. But in their home countries, they still use their own calendars for their festivals, for everything else that goes on that's unique to them as a society. So, this is the current Gregorian calendar. Now, like I said, these dates I set up because I was originally going to do this talk in March. So, I'd set it up for the 27th of March 2026. That's the Gregorian date, which also is the 14th of March 2779. That's the date of creation of Rome. The Greeks, well, you already know it'll be the equivalent of, I can never pronounce this name right, Elefolion, the 8th of Elefolion, 2801, which is the first year of the 701st Olympiad. The solar calendar tells us it was the 8th of March. Now, for today's date, today's the 27th of April, which equates to the 14th of April in the Julian, or the 9th of April solar. So when we're looking at the seasons, you need to look at the solar. So going back to the 28th or 27th of March 2026, you see the sun is at 7 degrees Aries, which would have made it the 7th of March. So the month and the date fixes with where the sun is on the zodiac. Now, that's not the only ones that do it. The almanacs, the farmers and the Old Moore's almanacs still work using solar dates. Farmers, horticulture, agriculture still works off the solar calendar because life works off the sun. The sun's intensity, the sun's heat, the sun's energy changes according to its natural progression. So you can put whatever date you like on it, it doesn't make a single iota, because the sun is going to be in that position at that particular time. And as pagans and as light workers, witches, shaman, bruja, vulva, we all work off the sun's energy. We invoke it in our circle because we start east. So we need to be on point as to what part of the year we are going to do our particular rituals. There is often as pagans, we like to wag our finger at the Christians and say, you stole our festivals, you put your festivals on top of ours. As an archaeologist, I can tell you there is absolutely no evidence of that whatsoever at any point in time. The Romans did, but the Romans were also pagan. They put their pagan gods and found the equivalents. The most famous one is Sulis and Minerva. You have the baths at Bath, and you have the goddess named twice. The Celtic Sulis and the Roman Minerva. So that's the only time that one festival was supplanted on top of another. They amalgamated. The Christians never put their festivals on top of ours. They made their own calendar that's 22 days out of whack. And that's why the signs of the zodiac changed on the 21st and 22nd of the month. That shows you how far out the Christian calendar is. It's not the Christians put their festivals on top of ours. The neo-pagans are putting their new festivals on top of the Christian. It's the other way around. So when you look on the group and you see the dates that are put down, those are the solar dates, not the Christian ones. The next one coming up is Beltane, which is always seen as the 1st of May. May Day. The name May Day comes from the Communist Party, who had actually lobbied the government to actually have a workers' holiday, and it was called May Day. And that's from the Communist Party. It's nothing to do with ancient civilizations or anything else like that. The Christian day for it is known as the Feast of St. Francis the Worker. And St. Francis is the adopted father to Jesus. That's what that festival is about. It's like the 1st of January is the Feast of St. Mary, the Mother of God. It's nothing to do with the pagans. It's got nothing to do with us. It's all to do about Christianity. And it's their calendar, their festivals. So we've got to get rid of this idea that they nicked ours. We're nicking theirs. They're putting ours on top. But, like I said, if you're going to work a circle, you work with the elements that's around you, and the sun being one of them. And we have to follow the true solar panel. It has a pattern that we have to adhere to. Yeah? Does that make sense till now? About as clear as mud, eh? But the next time that I'll actually post the azimuth measurements. Now I've got to give credit where credit is due to my great aunt Winda Anderson, who in 1917 started going around the northern part of the UK and measuring a number of sites. One of the sites that she actually hit was Castlereagh in Cumbria, and those measurements and her diagrams are still available online. Yeah, a lot of people still use them, and she was the one that fixed a lot of this, that the azimuth, the solar position, indicated the date, not the other way around. So I'm going to give her credit because I just merely picked up what she had already started. Now I also have to give credit to Liz Fitzharris, who is my co-conspirator in this, because we did this research right away across Europe and visited hundreds of stone circles and megaliths across the UK and Ireland and Northern Europe, and took all these measurements and got it right. And we both ended up with a PhD as a result of it, because archaeologists now use this system to calculate where the stones actually point, or stone rows or passage tombs. And it's like a lot of archaeology has moved away from using dates to fix. I mean, historians and librarians already knew this problem between what they referred to as New Style and Old Style dates. A date in the New Style did not equate, or rather a date in the Old Style did not equate to the date in the New Style. So if they had a book written in 1771 or 1751, the date on that was clearly Julian, so they would refer to that date as OS, meaning Old Style, meaning that if you want to find the equivalent date in the Gregorian, you have to push it forward 12 days, and then it would make sense. So particularly if you want to sort of carry on an anniversary or something like that, you would have to adjust for the difference in calendars. That is where we are at. We now have calendars all over the place. The Indians have their own, the Taoists, Hindus, Muslims, Eastern Orthodox, they've only just had Easter because of the difference between the Julian and Gregorian calendar. And then there's us. We work with the sun, stick to the solar calendar. It will make more sense. It also makes more sense to the seasons, because there's a lot of controversy about this sort of idea of climate change, to what extent it really is down to certain factors. I mean, cows have been accused of farting or burping. They only constitute 0.4% of all global emissions. But when you actually follow the solar calendar, the seasons don't seem quite out of whack. That's what they once did. Because don't forget, there's still an error in the way that those calendars are corrected. And bizarrely enough, the recalculation of the Julian calendar that they did in 2014 means that the Julian calendar's calculation year on year is more accurate than the Gregorian, which still has a slight 0.2% error greater than the Julian. Why don't we scrap them? We can't scrap them. We can't expect people to suddenly have or to go back to a different time. We've got to learn to work with it. We know that some countries use the Julian. Overall, everybody uses the Gregorian. For us, ceremonial or practical magic works. We use the solar. We fix our days according to that. We're never going to get back the old days. And I kind of like having the solar calendar as our exclusive calendar, because it was always ours. It doesn't matter whether you were sitting on the horizon watching the sunrise next to a star sign, or whether you're here on the moors looking at the sun rising next to a stone. That makes it special. That makes it ours. That makes it pagan. And nothing can change that. Because even though the procession has occurred, it still works. The passage tombs in the Hill of Tara or elsewhere, they still, Newgrange, Douth, Loughborough, they still work. Another one, Pillar 43, Göbekli Tepe. The archaeologists at the University of Edinburgh have just figured out that that shows a solar calendar. And I've already put up a film where one of those archaeologists actually filmed, I think it was the winter solstice, where the light from the rising sun was able to shine between two T-columns across the face of the Great Mother. And it literally shone straight across as it moved. It would have been full on to the face 10,000 years ago, but it was still there. That's an alignment done deliberately. It's not a fluke, because it would have happened at any other time, or it may never have happened. This happened exclusively on that one day in the entire year. So, I've confused you enough. That'll do for now. If you've got any questions, write it down in the comments below this. This video will be available for 30 days on Facebook. After that, they delete it. But I will take a copy of it and put it on my YouTube channel. So it will be there indefinitely if you want to review it and listen to my dulcet tones. So, with that, have a good day.